Good morning. Welcome to episode 102 of the Political Mike podcast. I'm here on the campus of Oakwood University, and it's not just any event. This is Alumni Weekend. I'm joined with some of the best and the brightest that the Oakwood University Political Science Department has to offer. I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves to you at this time.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chantel Williams. I am a junior here at Oakwood and a history major.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alana Thomas. I'm a junior public policy major.
Good morning. My name is Pax Fordham. I'm a communications major, junior, political science minor. So I still belong to be here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elise Hall. I'm a third-year senior here at Oakwood University, and I'm studying international relations.
So we have a lot to get into today. We are in uncharted territory. A former president has been indicted for a criminal charge, and not just any criminal charge, paying hush money payments to an adult film actress. You have many allies of the former president jumping to his defense, arguing that this is a politically motivated indictment. You have others saying this is actually going to give him a political boost in the 2024 campaign. You also have control of the Wisconsin Supreme Court swinging in liberals' direction. This is important. Why? Because the fate of abortion rights and gerrymandering and so many other important issues was on the ballot. The United States finds itself in a post-Roe versus Wade era, as state by state is enacting abortion laws, and that would make it harder for women to be able to access such care. We also are dealing with a situation in the state of Tennessee, where the Republican-controlled House of Representatives has voted to expel 2 of 3 Democratic lawmakers who a week ago participated in a protest for stricter gun laws in the wake of yet another mass shooting. Representatives Justin Jones and Justin Pearson, who are both black, have been expelled, while their white colleague, Representative Glory Johnson, who protested with them, has not been expelled. But first, we turn our attention to foreign policy. Russian President Vladimir Putin announced last month, this past March, that Moscow would complete the construction of a storage facility for tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus by the beginning of July of this year. After days of silence, the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, welcomed the move, announcing he had intensified talks with Putin about deploying both tactical and strategic nuclear weapons in the country. It's important to note that Belarus shares a border with Lithuania, Latvia, and Poland, all of which are members of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Lithuania, Latvia, and Poland, those 3 countries have comprised the military alliance that was originally established to deter Soviet expansion in Europe after World War II. We're so glad to be able to be joined by Dr. Richard Haas, the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, to be able to ask him about his thoughts on such issues. Dr. Haas, are you there?
I am here. Hopefully you can hear me.
We can hear you, sir. Good to see you. So we want to start the conversation, sir. What are your thoughts about Vladimir Putin deploying nuclear weapons in Belarus and NATO's condemnation? Is that condemnation going to result in the strengthening of NATO? We saw the addition of Finland to NATO this week. What are your thoughts, sir?
NATO is much stronger than it was thanks to Vladimir Putin. His aggression against Ukraine has reminded people in Europe about why NATO exists. If it didn't exist, we'd probably want to invent it. You just had Finland join, the 31st member now of NATO. At some point, we'll add Sweden to it. So NATO is larger and stronger than it was before the war began in Ukraine or this phase of the war began just over a year ago. I don't like the idea of new Russian deployments of nuclear weapons in Belarus or anywhere else. But Mr. Putin's conventional military forces have been shown to be lacking. The one thing he has is a large nuclear arsenal. So it doesn't surprise me that he's trying to shower attention on his nuclear weapons. I think he's hoping that it intimidates the West into backing down. It won't succeed, but we are where we are.
We're going to go ahead and turn our attention now to our panelists. And by the way, they have used your book, the text, The World, A Brief Introduction, as the text for their American Diplomacy course.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so I agree with you, Mr. Haas. I believe that the West will try its best not to escalate the situation. I also feel that Russia is applying pressure in order to manipulate the West into lessening its support of Ukraine. But I do have a question for you. I was wondering, would you argue that this is more of like a Russian response or an act of aggression? Because as we do know, the United States has placed over 100 nuclear weapons in different European countries. So how would you argue? Would you say it's a response or an aggression?
Russia's war against Ukraine is 100% an act of aggression on the part of Russia. There's nothing new in the Western military capabilities posed against Russia that in any way triggered this war. In 2014, Russia first went into Ukraine. Then nearly 2 years ago, Mr. Putin published an essay where he basically denied Ukraine's separate sovereign existence. Then in February of last year, he once again invaded Ukraine. So this is simply a Russian attempt to essentially eliminate Ukraine as an independent sovereign country. I think he's worried about the example it sets as a democratic, Western-oriented Slavic country on Russia's border. It's Russian propaganda to put out the argument that somehow what Russia has done is a response, but there was nothing new. It'd been since 15 or more years before that even talk had begun about the idea of Ukraine joining NATO. No steps had been taken in that direction. So the Russian argument that it's somehow responding to Ukraine or NATO simply doesn't pass the laugh test here. Sorry.
Hello, Dr. Haas. My name is Elise Hall. I'm a junior here at Oakwood University studying international relations. And I completely agree with you that, we see Russia using kind of like an excuse to strengthen its relations with China and also Belarus with the tactical nuclear weapons. But this kind of segues into a question I have for you. On page 91 of your book, The World, A Brief Introduction, you write that it is unclear how China will utilize its power. In light of these recent developments with Chinese-Russo relations, do we have a clearer understanding of China's intentions? And also, what are the interests that drive China to strengthen its relationship with Russia?
Interesting question or questions. China's obviously moved closer to Russia. Just over a year ago, Xi Jinping, the leader of China, Vladimir Putin of Russia, signed a so-called no limits agreement. It's not quite an alliance, but it moves the two countries very close. China's been helping Russia economically avoid sanctions since then. They've given them certain technologies that help them not just economically, but in some ways also strengthen them militarily. Diplomatically, China's been giving Russia support. I think China and Russia share opposition to the United States and to a United States-led world. Obviously, they neither one is in the same zip code as a democracy, and I think they want to push back against the idea of democratic advance or democratic spread. So I think it's a relationship between the two, born both of what they oppose in common and who they are somewhat in common. That said, Russia and China are very different. Russia is essentially a nuclear power, not much of a conventional military power. It's an energy power, but not economic. It's a small country, only 140 million people, and doesn't have much of an economy. China's the world's second largest economy, truly global. It has 9 times the population of Russia. It's a growing military power, both conventional forces and nuclear. So I think they're in very different places. I think China is increasingly the senior partner in this relationship. Russia provides raw materials to China, which is quite helpful. And I think it's useful for China as it focuses on expanding its influence, that this long border it has with Russia is something it doesn't have to worry about strategically. So I think it's a marriage of convenience, if you will, between the two. But strategically, it works against the United States because you have 2 of the major powers in the world increasingly cooperating or collaborating with one another. So it complicates the task we have of dealing with either. And it also means that in trying to deal with various regional or global issues, in many cases, we will have neither of them supporting us and quite possibly one or both of them trying to complicate our lives.
Thank you. I remember reading somewhere that, I can't remember where, but that China is the US's #1 competitor economically, militarily, technologically. So how will this partnership, as it strengthens, how is China working to upset the status quo in terms of possibly replacing the United States as a world superpower?
Look, China is growing militarily, economically, but I think there's limits to what China can accomplish. China has many strengths. There's many things it's doing that are impressive. It also has many weaknesses. Its population, which is now 1.4 million, most people project that by the end of this century, it'll be well under 1 billion, possibly as low as 800 million. Economic growth has slowed in China this decade compared to previous decades. There's tremendous environmental problems in China. So one could go on. So China has its own internal challenges, shall we say. But I do think it's a more significant regional and global challenge to challenger to the United States than is Russia. And look, a big part of the history of this century is going to be determined or defined by the U.S.-Chinese relationship, or lack of one. These are the two most capable countries of this era of history. And if we end up in conflict or something like a Cold War, history goes in a darker direction. If the United States and China are able to manage their differences and even in some cases find some limited ability to cooperate, it's a much brighter 21st century. I don't have the answer to that question. But if you were going to ask me what's the most pivotal relationship of this era of history, it's likely to be the United States and China, just like it was the United States and the Soviet Union during the 4 decades of the Cold War. Or in the first half of the century, you would have said it was probably France, Britain, Germany, the United States, and Russia, all of them together. But I think, for going ahead, I think the United States and China, that is the place to focus on. And at the moment, it's impossible to predict how this relationship will go. But I will say it's much more competitive than it was 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. And the potential for conflict, a conflict that would serve neither country's interests, is greater than it was.
Thank you, Dr. Haas. We've already stated that that we use your textbook, The World, as our American diplomacy textbook. In addition to that, our history and political science department here at Oakwood University plans on visiting you at the Council of Foreign Relations headquarters in New York this upcoming fall. In short, we are Haas groupies. Some people like Beyonce, some people like LeBron. I'm a Haas guy. You know that. You know that. We know this. So in that, I want to ask you, what is your vision for the council? And then also, if you could please share your favorite experiences or your favorite days, favorite events from your tenure there and why.
First of all, the idea that you're a Haas groupie rather than a Beyonce groupie really makes me question your judgment. If I were your professor, I think you would have just failed the course. Sorry to tell you that. Look, what I feel best about the council over the last 20 years since I've been here is that we've continued doing what we always do. We publish the leading magazine in the world about the world foreign affairs. We produce hundreds of books and thousands of articles and host thousands of meetings. And they're smart and hopefully have some impact and influence. But I also feel really good about what we started up around a decade ago, which is to become much more of an educational institution. And we're now in classrooms at the high school and college level in all 50 states and well over 100 countries. We have an entire curriculum online we've produced that's free and available to all, called World 101. We have all sorts of simulations and so forth. And we have explainers on our website, cfr.org. I like the fact that we are trying to be a resource, not just for people who do foreign policy all the time, but for people who are beginners in foreign policy, who just want to learn a little bit about it. They may be doctors or lawyers or firemen or policemen or teachers. They're not going to do this all their time, but as citizens, they want to know a little bit about it. And I like the fact that we are now helping them and producing material for non-experts. You were kind enough to mention my book, and that's why I wrote my book. Again, it's a general book. It's an introductory book. It's a foundation for students and others who are trying to, again, get a start in the field, to get a basic understanding Well, I don't know about my favorite time over the last 20 years. I'll have to give that. I'll have to give them. I may punt on that. On that question. What comes to mind more are the difficult times, how we got through financial crises, how we got through a pandemic. Maybe that's an unfortunate statement in life, that sometimes you remember the challenges more than you remember the good times. But for me, there's been a lot of wonderful moments. This has been a really good life experience. I actually describe this as one of the two best jobs I've ever had. This one, and then the 4 years I spent at the White House working for George Herbert Walker Bush, the 41st president. And I've had many good experiences in my life, but if I had to say what were the two best professionally, this would be one of the two.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that greatly.
So we're also joined with Representative Jim Clyburn of South Carolina's 6th Congressional District. Congressman Clyburn, are you with us?
I think I am.
Good to see you, Congressman. And I'm glad to have both of you on. I want to throw both of you a question in light of the fact that China and Russia seem to be getting cozy lately. President Xi calling President Putin my dear friend in recent weeks. You have the Chinese, looking as if they're trying to align themselves more in alignment with Russia. I want to ask you, do you think that if the Chinese provide weapons to the Russians, do you think that the United States should retaliate by placing certain tariffs, specifically tariffs maybe on the manufacturing plants that are the Chinese are heavily dependent on for their aircraft industry? I think Beijing is specifically heavily dependent upon Western companies as it pertains to their aircraft industries. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, let me just say that I'm pleased to be joining you. And like you, I'm not going to opt for taking Richard Haas over Beyonce. But I do Morning Joe with him every now and then, and I have a great deal of admiration and respect for him. And that's a question that he is much more capable of answering than I am. So, Richard, I defer to you.
Congressman, it's an honor to be with you. You're someone for whom I have unlimited respect, and so again, it's a real treat for me, and also it's a real treat to be with you, not at 6 o'clock in the morning. This is much more civilized.
That's great. Thank you.
I've now had my coffee. Look, we're obviously spending a lot of time diplomatically trying to dissuade China from giving more help to Russia, drawing something of a line in the sand about explicit military help. So far, as best I can tell, China has not crossed that line. But they might. They could send arms directly. They could also send arms to other countries who could then ship them on to Russia. There's ways to try to hide their involvement if they decide to go down that path, which they might. We don't know what they're prepared to do to make sure Russia doesn't lose. I think then we would have to think about economic sanctions. We do diplomatic criticism if they did that. We would think about economic sanctions against China. And we would also have to think about, if China provided arms to Russia, what effect that would have on the military balance in Ukraine, and ways we might help Ukraine more than we already are in terms of, for example, providing certain arms or accelerating others. So I think, again, the focus of the Biden administration is to prevent exactly the scenario you said, because it has the potential to really prolong this awful war. But if it were to happen, I think there'd be a diplomatic and economic sanctions, and probably a military action, military in the sense of providing Ukraine with certain equipment to make sure that that whatever China did would not meaningfully affect the military balance inside of Ukraine.
So there's a lot of tension on the current indictment charges facing the former president, Donald J. Trump. This has never happened in American history before, not even with Richard Nixon, thanks to the Ford pardon of 1974. A lot of folks are saying this is going to divide the country even further. A lot of folks are saying this is something that we should be celebrating because the rule of law has, prevailed. I want to get your thoughts on to whether or not this will divide the country or whether it's necessary. There are a lot of people saying that this is going to give the former president a political boost as he seeks to reclaim the White House in the current 2024 election cycle. What are your thoughts? Anyone could jump in.
Well, what may be a short-term boost which I suspect that this will be, will really wither when exposed to sunlight. And so much of what is taking place today over the next several weeks and months are going to be exposed. And I think that we're already seeing the American people taking a closer look at a lot of things. And I just do not believe, just based upon my own past experiences, that these things that are taking place, these four big investigations that are taking place, already one indictment, and the expectation there may be 2 or 3 other indictments coming. These things are going to be exposed to the American people, and the more they see and hear, the less enthralled they're going to be with the former president. That's just my belief. Now, we have no way of knowing until all of this gets underway. But I remember people telling me that Joe Biden had absolutely no chance to get the Democratic nomination. But who's sitting in the White House today? So I just say that you have to keep plugging along, keep doing what you know that needs to be done, and hope it comes out okay. With Joe Biden, it came out just fine.
And I want to, jump on that Biden train with you. I was a supporter of Biden before he jumped in. I think April 25th, 2019. He was my number one choice. Stuck with him all the way. But I do want to go ahead and turn our attention to our student panelists at this time.
So I think that it would be actually politically beneficial for people in the MAGA world and Trump's campaign. And I agree with you with it being a short-term benefit. I think that Trump has been able to manipulate his supporter base into thinking that these charges are not only a political assault on him, but his constituents. And I think we all saw it on January 6th. We saw it when the FBI raided his Florida house, and in light of his arrest, that not only his supporters, but the GOP also seems to be constantly backing up whatever Trump does. And I have, for example, in light of the arrest, Speaker McCarthy tweeted on March 18th, "Here we go again, an outrageous abuse of power by a radical DA who lets violent criminals walk as he pursues political vengeance against President Trump." So I think it's going to be a really interesting thing to watch unravel. And yeah, I'm excited to see what actually comes out of it.
What are your thoughts about the attack on Alvin Bragg as a partisan by the House GOP? I think Alvin Bragg gave a response yesterday, basically saying, stay out of our business, stay out of the New York district, the Manhattan district's, current investigation. I'm sorry, current indictment of and the prosecution of the former president. Jim Jordan, you have Matt Gaetz, a lot of folks decrying that this is just using the legal system for political gain and political purposes. Lindsey Graham, is making an altar call on Fox News, begging for funds and donations for the former president's legal fees. Are we likely to see? The former president solidify his position as the front runner? A lot of folks have given DeSantis attention as the most viable candidate who can challenge the former president. What are your thoughts, both of you?
Well, I can take this one first. If a week is a long time in politics, a lifetime, we're talking months here, or over a year. So I think we need to slow down. I think attacks on officers of the court, on district attorneys, on judges and the rest, there's no place for that in American politics. There's no place for threats, much less physical attacks. We can and should and will disagree, but there's simply no place for coercion or the threat of a physical force in our democracy, and that ought to be delegitimized. And by the way, not just by politicians, but I think the people who preach in churches, in synagogues and mosques have a responsibility to denounce any physical threats to people we disagree with. I would not have made this if, all things being equal. I don't think this was the best first indictment. I think Mr. Trump is accused what I would say as more serious things in terms of threatening the political process in this country. That said, no one's above the law. And I think, what Congressman Clyburn says could well be true, that once these other indictments, if and when they're introduced, the combination of them will have a certain weight. We'll find out. And the answer is, I don't know. He doesn't know. It's impossible to know. But in the meantime, I think it's important these things play out. That's why we have a legal process, and then we'll have a political process where voters can reach their own judgment as to the fitness of Donald Trump, first to be a Republican candidate, to be the nominee, and then if he is the nominee, to be the next president of the United States. That's what democracy is all about here.
Congressman?
I tend to agree with that, but I will say this in addition. I think it's very clear that the former president would be a much better opponent for Joe Biden than any fresh face. So my interest in this has nothing to do with politics, because if I had my druthers, he would be the political opponent I would want. My interest in this has to do with democracy itself, and whether or not we are going to sustain ourselves as a country. I'm writing my third book now. Richard would be surprised to know I write books. But I'm calling this book, Before I Was First, There Were Eight. Now, the whole subtext of this is, before I was the first African-American to represent South Carolina in the United States Congress, there were 8 before me. I'm the 9th. The problem is there are 95 years between number 8 and number 9. And the reason for those 95 years has to do with the Constitution of the United States, has to do with the Supreme Court's interpretation of the Constitution. Pleasant versus Ferguson of 1896 set us on the separate but equal course. The Khrushchev decision in 1872, the Slaughterhouse cases, all of these cases interpret the Constitution in the lights of separate but equal, Jim Crow, all these things. That, to me, is my problem, because I'm convinced, and I said this on national television a couple of days ago, that whoever is advising the former president, I'm convinced they studied the 1876 presidential election. They saw what happened with the Tilden-Hayes Compromise of 1876 that closed down Reconstruction. Rutherford B. Hayes became president of the United States by one vote. By one vote. Took the federal troops out of the South, ushered in Jim Crow, and look what it gave to this country. I'm convinced that these people are using that period of time as their playbook. And so that's why I want to see Trump stopped, because I really believe they are attempting to usher in, a lot of people call this little period to be started in the 1960s, the second Reconstruction. Well, I've been telling people, if the first Reconstruction can come to an end, the second Reconstruction can come to an end. And so that's my problem with this. It's not about politics. If it were just about politics, he would be the opponent I would want.
I kind of wanted to echo Michael's question about DeSantis. Just the fact that obviously he's a popular contender right now. But I do know he's not seen as charismatic as Trump. I just kind of wanted to pose the question in terms of his likability right now in the GOP. Do you think that he is that strong contender? Do you think that he could take Trump on in the election, or is he going to kind of fade out with the other candidates?
Well, as the one person on the screen who for 40 years was a Republican, I'll probably answer that, though no longer. The short answer is nobody knows. We haven't had any debates yet. Governor DeSantis is not even a formal candidate as yet. We've got all this attention, shall we say, being showered on the former president. We have no idea who else is going to get in the race, whether the former vice president will come in, the former secretary of state, in addition to Governor Haley. So yeah, we could spend hours talking about it, and the answer is we'd be talking through our hats. We just don't know. It's a little bit like we just finished the NCAAs. You can have all the predictions before the game, but after you play the game. So politics will play the game. We'll see what happens. We'll see who's ultimately the Republican nominee. And we'll see, you'll have a general election, and then we'll see what the context is. And there you have it. But I don't think there's a whole lot to say right now about Governor DeSantis or anybody else, because in many ways, the Republican contest hasn't really gotten underway.
We take a quick poll, show of hands. How many of you think that Trump poses the biggest threat to Biden in the 2024 election? Raise your hand. Wow, no one. DeSantis? Okay, we got a few. John Sununu, Governor of New Hampshire. Nikki Haley. Okay. Who else is running? Asa Hutchinson, that's right. He just announced recently, former governor of Arkansas. Announcement coming soon in Bentonville. So we've got an audience that seems to not think that any of the Republican candidates pose a serious threat right now as things stand. Of course, like you said, Dr. Haas, a week is a lifetime.
But also, Mike, if you had a similar question at this stage of previous political cycles, I doubt your audience would have suggested Bill Clinton or Barack Obama would have been the nominee, much less the president. This is still early on. And I just think too soon to be focused on this, quite honestly. We got a lot of things that have to play out, not just politically, but among other things, what'll matter is the economy and what the context is of the election. Who knows what's going on with the war in Ukraine? There's just so many factors that are going to shape the 2024 election. The most interesting thing, and I'd be interested in the congressman's point of view, what just happened in Wisconsin this week might have been the most significant thing in affecting the Supreme Court of Wisconsin, because we're unlikely to have the kind of political challenge to a slate of electors that really could have created political chaos in the United States. And I think the fact that was probably taken off the table might have been the most significant thing that's happened in the last few days, more significant than anything to do with the former president.
Yeah,
I agree wholeheartedly. And I happen to be, this may surprise me at the end too. I was between my 1960 and 1964 presidential elections that I began to identify as a Democrat. I grew up in a Republican household. My parents were Republicans. They were all members of the party of Lincoln. And I'm old enough to have grown out of all of that. But I think he's right. It's too early to deal with this. I don't know of anybody who predicted that the Wisconsin Supreme Court election would be over a 10-point spread. I saw last night a district or a county in Wisconsin that had been like 67, 68% Republican, came out 50-50 this time. So in Chicago, who ever heard of Brandon Johnson? I'd never really heard of Brandon Johnson until I'm up in Philadelphia. I turned on my TV and I saw this interview. And I'm looking at him and I'm listening to him. I immediately called Robin Kelly. So I want to get to know Brandon Johnson. I said, I think this guy can win. And then we started raising money for him, doing stuff for him. And nobody predicted, but he won. So you never know what these things will do. You have to get into the campaign and expose yourself to the elements, if you please, and then see how you conduct yourself. That's DeSantis' problem. DeSantis has got a real personality problem. I'd love to see how he holds up under real scrutiny and see if he can learn how to smile.
So this was, I mean, this was a big election because not only did it determine the fate of, like Dr. Haas mentioned, whether or not Trump could have his own folks in the positions of being able to overturn the state's electoral votes and the state departments, the Secretary of State's office, but you also had abortion rights on the ballot. Roe versus Wade has been overturned since June 24th of 2022. This has opened up the floodgates, it seemed, for a lot of people to mobilize and galvanize themselves to the polls and to organize, in protest of some of these state laws that are coming out one after the other, designed to restrict women's access to abortion care. Do you think that this issue, the overturning of Roe versus Wade, will play as large of an issue in 2024 as it did in 2022?
Oh, I think so. If it had just been Roe v. Wade and people start trying to, because justice, that'd be one thing. But to have these states doubling down the way they are doing it, they are making this a much bigger thing than even it was. Though I'm the father of 3 daughters, and I can tell you that this is an issue that nobody running for office need to get on the wrong side of. And it seems like too many on the other side of the aisle are getting on the wrong side of this issue. And I can tell you, they're going to pay dearly for it.
I would put it slightly differently, but I think we agree. I think they've overreached. I think there's a consensus in America that there ought to be some limit. There ought to be access to abortion, but there have to be certain limits on it. And I think we can debate that, but there's something of a consensus there. And I think the Republicans now have way overreached in either in essentially saying there can't to deny access to abortion in many cases. So my hunch, this is legally, but even more politically, they're on very, very shaky grounds. And I think this will continue to hurt them at the state level as well as at the national level. Whenever you got to get out of sync with the center of this country, you're in trouble. And I think Republicans have gotten out of sync here.
So I kind of wanted to segue into the issue of affirmative action. Representative Clyburn, what you said about Reconstruction, the second Reconstruction in the 1960s can also come to an end. We're now seeing the likely end of affirmative action this summer. So what are the pros and cons of affirmative action ending for our generation, and how will that impact the Black community? We've already seen in places like California and Michigan where affirmative action is actually banned, and we've seen race-neutral admissions being implemented instead of affirmative action. We've already seen diversity has declined in these institutions, and these practices as well. So how will this impact the Black community as a whole?
I got to take off and just say, Mike, thanks for having me.
Of course.
Congressman, it's an honor and a pleasure to be with you on any screen or in person.
It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
I
really
really
enjoyed this. I'm intimidated by you. Your leaving will give me a little bit of.
Can we show some appreciation for Dr. Haas? Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Haas. So, Congressman Clyburn, this question was designed for you. It was specifically about affirmative action.
Yeah, well, as you probably know, I used to run the South Carolina Human Affairs Commission for 18 years. I did the affirmative action stuff for the entire state of South Carolina. Believe it or not, we had affirmative action at the state level in South Carolina long before New York and some other northern states did. And of course, we were doing that in conjunction with the then governor, John West's belief in affirmative action. Now, I think one of the big problems that we have, and I don't know whether the Supreme Court will ever deal with this, but I have always argued that we should make clear that affirmative action deals with a floor rather than a ceiling. Now, we hear a lot of arguments about the so-called glass ceiling, but we never apply it to these programs. I do. When you talk about affirmative action, you aren't talking about putting a quota on anything. You aren't talking about putting a ceiling on anything. You're saying no less than, not no more than. And so when you put a floor, a foundation upon which to build, and I would love to see the Supreme Court deal with this issue as the establishment of a foundation below which we should not allow anybody to exist, but upon which everybody can build a future. That is where we've got to get this argument to. It's like the whole issue of reparations. I say to people all the time, the root word for reparations is repair. What can we do to repair? I think it was Alexis de Tocqueville, I'm sure that many of you have studied on that campus. De Tocqueville wrote back in 1835, 36, that America is not great because it is more enlightened than any other nation, but rather because it has always been able to repair its faults. And that's the thing here, to get people to focus on repairing faults, get people to focus on establishing a foundation upon which we exist. And affirmative action were to be dealt with, as we did here in South Carolina, as a floor beneath which we will not allow any county for South Carolina. It will be state for the United States of America to exist. So if you're running the county government or city government, then there must be a floor established upon which you can build. And so I think that that's where we are with affirmative action. I don't know if the very smart lawyers will ever get around to dealing with that, putting that issue before the Supreme Court and see how the Supreme Court will deal with that. We always allow it to exist as a quota or some ceiling, and I think that that's where our problem is.
Thank you.
So we did have a situation that occurred yesterday in the state of Tennessee. You had the GOP-controlled House expelling 2 of the 3 Democratic lawmakers who were protesting the inaction of the state House as it pertains to imposing some meaningful gun laws. In the wake of yet another mass shooting that has taken the nation's attention a little over a week ago. Do you think that that decision by the GOP-controlled House to expel the 2 young Black lawmakers had anything to do with race?
Yes, I do. There's no question in my mind. The fact of the matter is, may not with everybody. Remember, it took 2/3 votes to expel. The 2/3 were there for the 2 Black guys, not there for the 1 white woman. Now, that does not mean that everybody who voted were racially motivated with their votes. It means that enough of the people who voted were racially motivated enough to allow for the final decision to have an adverse impact on one race as opposed to another. Because the woman was able to keep her seat by 1 vote, just enough. Remember, Rutherford B. Hayes became president of the United States of America and brought an end to Reconstruction by 1 vote. And just because it was 1 vote doesn't mean it cannot have application on 100% of the people. That 1 vote had application on 100% of Black folks. And so what happened yesterday by 1 vote, you kept the white person and got rid of the Black person. Yes, racially motivated by enough people to make a difference.
Well, Congressman, we're so appreciative of your time. Thank you so much for being able to join us this morning.
Well, thank you so much. Now, I came on 11 o'clock because my calendar said I'm supposed to join you at 11. So I don't know if I was supposed to be here early or not, but thank you so much for having me.
That's totally fine. Thank you so much. Thank you, Congressman. So now let's talk amongst ourselves, ladies and gentlemen. We've discussed a lot as it pertains to what we saw play out in Tennessee. What are your thoughts about what took place? You have the two Black young lawmakers who have been expelled from their positions under the state constitution. The required votes were tallied and everything like that. They've been expelled for their position on for protesting. Your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Tennessee's my home state. Nashville's my home city. Whenever these things happen, I think about the gun control, gun rights debate in general, and I always feel like it always goes to a shift in the conversation. When someone shoots up the Covenant Christian School, the conversation turns to trans people and who did the action and who's doing it. Now we're turning the conversation to the people protesting against it, and I always ask myself if the debate we're having is actually genuine. I know that in politics, there's a lot of backing by corporations and NRA interests that are keeping people from actually having an honest debate. And I wish and hope we can get to a point where our Republican lawmakers can share their reasonable and honest thoughts without having to second guess what their, I would say, corporate interest supporters may think.
And the interesting about this is when we look back at the summer of 2022, we see that there was some surprising action. The first gun law in about 30 years that was enacted into law, signed by President Biden. A lot of people were surprised that he was able to get that done. Now, the political motivation behind that, in my view, was that if we take this off the table now in the summer, this is not going to bite us in the fall, right? And yet, lo and behold, it didn't help or hurt them, right? However, I don't think that they're going to still show the same level of willingness to even budge on the state or federal level because there's nothing to politically gain now. We saw that although it didn't hurt them, Roe versus Wade played more of a dominant role. And that brings us to Wisconsin. So we had the liberal candidate, of course, millions of dollars. I mean, you look at the amount of campaign funds that were allocated towards this race. It's ridiculous. So much money has been poured into this race. I think it was even beyond some of these Senate races that we saw in 2022. It was a very important race for many reasons we discussed earlier. But I want to get your thoughts as it pertains to, which issues are going to dominate the news cycle currently. We didn't get to talk about it a little bit earlier, but I think, also the federal debt, the national budget, who's going to cave in more, Democrats or Republicans, right? So those are going to be the concerns as we head into the summer months, of this year. But as it pertains back to the gun debate, do you believe that Republicans would look at this and see that there is maybe widespread political backlash protesting? These two legislators have now become martyrs politically. Do you think that that's going to, kick them into gear a little bit more?
Honestly, personally, I think that because they're Black, two Black individuals, I'm not sure that it will push them to take it seriously. But I will say that I hope that's the case because I feel like the large majority of people who were watching the coverage of the recent shooting were troubled by it and have been troubled by it for a long time. So that's what I would say.
I have to agree. I think that the expulsion of the two representatives is definitely bringing to light the problems within the Conservative Party and the GOP. But I also wanted to segue, and I wanted to ask Representative Clyburn actually a question, or kind of just start a discussion about bipartisanship. I think we've all seen in the news, we see that, on the issue of abortion, gun control, all of these different niches in politics, that we never see the two parties come to a consensus anymore. So I don't know. I think I don't want to say that there is a decline, but I feel like maybe there is. I don't know. Maybe this is just an issue that highlights or is indicative of a decline of bipartisanship in American politics. Those
we
are
know
my
the
thoughts.
NRA is a dominant force,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And even though one of the Koch brothers may be gone, I mean, you've still got huge GOP donors, right? Not to mention one of them gave some big, generous gifts to Clarence Thomas. It was revealed yesterday. So, what are your thoughts? Pax?
Yeah, it I really want to ask, what is the solution to getting corporate money out of politics? We talk about this all the time in class. And from Supreme Court cases, we find that there's loopholes regarding free speech, and it's hard for us to get out of that. But yeah, I genuinely believe if super PACs weren't allowed to donate and the NRA wasn't allowed to fund people's campaigns as much, our Republican lawmakers would be having very different opinions on gun control. That's just my opinion.
And of course, we've got Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez calling for a House investigation and ultimate impeachment for Clarence Thomas. I was texting a friend of mine yesterday who's a regular panelist on the platform, and he said, here we go again. AOC and the squad are going to be the only Democrats shedding light on the need to impeach Clarence Thomas and the need to have some kind of oversight as it pertains to these funds that were made to the Supreme Court justice. Do you think that the Democrats in the Senate, being that that's the, as Washington said, I think it was the spoon that cools the saucer was the kind of verbiage he used to describe the U.S. Senate. Do you think the U.S. Senate Democrats, you got Warren, you got Bernie Sanders, you got, some of them like Tim Kaine, I'm sorry, Tim Kaine, do you think that any of these folks would take it more seriously and, push some investigations, even though they have a slight majority, right, a very slim majority, and thanks to the Arizona senator, that majority is even slimmer.
I feel like it's going to be hard to tell. I think a lot of them don't want to to lose their, I'm trying to get the words, I'm sorry. But I think it's going to be hard to tell. I think a lot of them, like with AOC and the squad, we see a lot of them have faced backlash. So I think that's a driving force behind a lot of, the Democrats we see in Congress, that they don't want to face the sort of backlash that we see. AOC, Ilhan Omar, and all of these important figures on these important issues. So I think we're just going to have to say and see if time will tell if they're going to do so. But I think they definitely should make a stronger stance on these issues.
Yeah, I also agree. I think when it comes to investigations, the right-wing backlash is always that, things aren't being done out of genuine concern for the law. They're arresting Trump because they hate him. They're throwing charges at him because they hate him and they hate all of us. And I think sometimes Democrats will see that backlash and not be as motivated to go for investigations, whether it's Trump or anyone on any side, because they don't want to come across as too partisan to the opposite side.
Oh, sorry. And I 100% agree with both of you. I think one of the major flaws in the Democratic Party is that they're not very good at briefing the public of what legislation they're trying to pass to help the public. When things do go wrong and their names are being dragged in the dirt, it's like they are blindsided and back away. And I think it would be a very big power move if they would then take that backlash and just brief the public and describe to them, no, these are the things that we are doing for you. Here's how we can help you, and empathize with them. And I'm specifically thinking about the Inflation Reduction Act right now, because as you know, we're dealing with a lot of inflation. People are angry about the gas prices, grocery prices going up. And I feel that if the Democratic Party truly explained to the public what they were doing and how they were able to accomplish that bill, which was passed along party lines. And if you don't know what that means, it basically means that they were able to pass this bill in the 117th Congress without any Republican vote. And I feel that that time where we had both the House and the Senate was the time to really deal with these issues, but they were just slacking a little bit. So I feel like that's a really big critique that I have about the Democratic Party.
Okay.
So in that same vein, Chantel, do you think that the 117th Congress, mind you, we talked about a lot of legislative victories, right? You're talking about messaging.
Yeah.
Do you think that that was the high watermark for the Biden presidency? Even if, if we have the same confidence that Congressman Clyburn has, Biden has 6 more years, right?
Yeah.
Is that the high watermark, those first 2 years of the Biden presidency?
I actually think it is the high watermark of the Biden presidency. In his first 2 years, he was able to pass the American Rescue Plan, which dealt with COVID relief. He was able to get that bipartisan infrastructure bill and the bipartisan gun safety bill, which was the largest one, although moderate, was the largest one we've seen in 30 years. I feel that having, like I said, having both the houses, they could have done more. But on top of that, I think the crown jewel of the Democratic Party was doing well in those midterm elections, especially when it was predicted that we would have a Republican wave. And I think holding the Senate majority, although slim, will give Democrats that wiggle room and comfort to pass bills and have control over certain Senate committees. So, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with your point of they've been doing stuff, but maybe just not as much broadcasting as they need to.
Yeah.
I think it also goes back to the idea that we haven't had as many victories in the social, controversial, hot topic issues that people love to talk about. You know, everyone's going to the polls for abortion, rightfully so.
Yeah.
But infrastructure, people don't really understand it. You know, you don't really know how to spell it out. So I think it goes back to the Democrats' need to learn how to say, no, this is what this issue is. Here's why you should care about it. And it's just as controversial, just as hot topic as any other thing you would see on NPR.
Exactly.
And I think the Conservative Party, Republican Party does a really good job of that to their constituents. You know, they grasp onto the issues of abortion, gun control, and they really make sure their constituents are understanding their agenda and to get them into the polls to vote for these issues. So I think the Democratic Party definitely needs to take a look at the other side and see you know, what the other side is doing so that we can also, you know, push our agendas as well.
Yeah.
So in that same vein, we talked a little bit about the primary process. We haven't seen a debate yet. I think the first debate is set for August of this year. I'm taking my mind back to 2015. I was in my junior year here at Oakwood University. I think I remember the excitement of that first debate when you had all these candidates running. And my take now is that the GOP needs to learn its lesson from 2015, 2016. You had 17 plus candidates running. You had a very small amount of them that really had a legitimate shot, but they still hung in there, and they were in the fifth debate. They were in the eighth debate. And you're still seeing like about 11 folks still on the stage. Now, if the GOP wanted to really, you know, win, in my view, what they would do is say, okay, Asa Hutchinson, you got Sununu, you've got Trump, DeSantis, Nikki Haley. I think John Bolton expressed he's going to jump in this race, you know, and anyone else, right? After that first debate, the GOP donors, the you know, Ronna McDaniel, the RNC chair, everyone gets together and says, okay, listen, you all want to be president one day, but we've got one shot to take out Biden. Who are we going to place our support behind? If you don't have, you know, at least 5% in the polling, it's time to drop out and put your support behind candidate X. I think that would be more effective. I don't think they learned a lesson, though. I think we're going to see a repeat of the 2015 cycle. You're going to see a wide array of folks as it pertains to foreign policy. You're going to see a lot of neocons. You're going to see a lot of folks who have different perspectives of a Republican future, with very few chance of being able to be that GOP nominee. Do you think that any of them have been an effective messenger, like you guys have been talking about, as it pertains to railing against the policies of the current administration?
I think DeSantis has an interesting sect that he is marketing towards. Trump can get arrested. He can go to Shawshank and wear an orange jumpsuit, but he still won't lose his base. But DeSantis markets to the people who still agree with Trump, you know, philosophically and all of his ideas, but don't necessarily like his rhetoric. I think the GOP might want to realize that at the end of the day, if DeSantis gets the nominations, the MAGA base will still go out and vote for DeSantis. But if Trump gets the nomination, he may lose some of the moderates who are just tired of his demeanor.
And you look at the legislative schedule, DeSantis is just on a roll, right? He's rolling out legislative wins that Republicans won. And, you know, I have an aunt who lives in Florida. She was like, even look at his mannerisms, the way he moves his hands, right? He's just imitating Trump to the T, right? So this is Trump light, right?
Yeah.
Trump without the indictments, Trump without the charges, Trump without the, you know, the adult film star, whatever, right? And yet you still have them voting for Trump, you know, at least by 30% ahead. So in my view, if I was DeSantis, I'll say, okay, let Trump die out 24. I'm coming back in 2028.
Really?
It reminds me of W. Bush in 1999, right? Where a lot of Republicans started to have a favorite right after, the 94 midterms. And, Bush wins, I think, in 1995 against the current Democratic governor, who was a woman. And, a lot of the GOP wagons were circling around George W. Bush. I think if DeSantis was patient, it might prove to be a little politically more beneficial to him. I think if he jumps into the ring, remember, there's a reason we're not talking about Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio anymore. These were the folks who were like the dominant figures of the party a few short years ago, and we saw what happened to them, right? Trump annihilated whoever was on that stage, right? He started with Jeb. He set his eyes on Jeb. And I remember the shock and the South Carolina primary. I said, oh my goodness, the Bush dynasty, right, is over. There was an audible gasp when he said, yeah, I'm going to drop out the race. Someone was like, he's out.
Yeah.
The brother and the son of a former president, right? Taken out by someone who hasn't held, he couldn't be elected dog catcher a few years ago, right? And the guy's now the GOP juggernaut, right? I think it's going to be an interesting cycle.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I think it's going to be in a cycle that's issues-based more, because although we talked about Biden a lot, the excitement is not there for Biden in the Democratic Party. Folks have openly expressed a desire to see someone else, someone younger, someone like a Gavin Newsom maybe, despite the fact that usually, I think the Democratic Party learned this lesson in 1980. You had Jimmy Carter, the incumbent, you had inflation, you had an ongoing crisis in the Middle East, right? The Iranian hostage crisis. And you had a situation where Ted Kennedy challenges the current incumbent, and it created a huge rift in the party. It weakened him. He was already in a bad situation, but it weakened him more severely as he went up against this charismatic Hollywood actor, the former governor of California, Ronald Reagan. Robert Kennedy Jr. announced that he's running for president yesterday. You had Marianne Williamson jumping into the race. Do you think any of these folks are going to weaken Biden maybe in a similar manner to the way Ted Kennedy weakened Jimmy Carter?
I wouldn't think so. I don't think these are popular. Has anyone in this room heard of Marianne Williamson before? Yeah, I don't think I saw her. I only know her because they played on SNL once, like one episode. But no, I don't think these are popular names. I think Biden's gonna get the nomination. That's it.
I mean, possibly Kennedy Jr. just because obviously he's younger, but yeah, he doesn't have as much experience. So
and he's an anti-vaxxer.
That too.
Right? Railed against Fauci, said he was a fascist, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, look, you also have the federal debt ceiling fight that's going to take place. That's going to dominate the news waves, I think, at least by early June, late May. There's going to be pressure. McCarthy's already, said, I'm not crossing this line. We need to, they promised to balance the budget, but they also promised not to cut entitlement programs. You remember the State of the Union when Biden called them out for wanting to cut Social Security and Medicaid. And what did they do? They started to heckle him.
Yeah.
And so now it's recorded. It's etched in stone. Okay. Biden said, okay, good. I'm glad we have it on the record. So that was a campaign ad that wrote itself. Right. Is that going to be effective? The Democrats saying, they're hypocrites, right? They said they're not going to cut your entitlement programs. Look at them, right? They're cutting it right now. They're proposing legislative measures to cut your Social Security check, to cut your Medicare, to cut your Medicaid. They want to still repeal the Affordable Care Act. Is that, going back to the messaging conversation, going to be effective as we're, starting to get into the summer and in the fall?
Yes, I think that's going to be effective, but I feel at the same time the Democrats need to market it in a good way. And I also feel that they need to reach out to those voters that are in those rural areas, so they can get a larger supporter base. Because you can say all of this to someone in California and they'll be like, yeah, I know this. But then the people that don't necessarily get reached out to, they get kind of lost and put in the dark. So it really depends on how the Democrats market it.
And I also think the Democratic Party could win a lot of voters from the Republican Party if they
Yeah.
marketed it better and, work to improve their messaging to say, hey, we're pushing for you to keep your Social Security, your Medicare, your Medicaid, all of that. Because I think a lot of these voters that vote for, say, like Trump or in the Republican Party, they have they really don't have any idea where that comes from.
Yeah.
But they know that they reap the benefits. So if the Democratic Party can target that and say, look, you're able to go to the doctor, you're able to get insulin because we passed the Inflation Reduction Act,
Exactly.
so you can continue to live. So if we just like if the Democratic Party can target those issues and say, look, this is what we're doing for you. Don't focus on a critical race theory that they're trying to distract you with. Focus on the things that are impacting you and your loved ones right now. I think that's the way we can get more voters to push these agendas.
Yeah, like almost a no voter left behind.
Right.
mindset.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's
Exactly.
good. Trademark
Yeah,
that. That's
because
good.
I
Write
don't
that down.
think I just don't think
That's
just
good.
continuing to speak to the same constituents is doing anything. We
Yeah.
know this. We know that all the things they've done for us. We need to start looking beyond our own party and our constituents
Exactly.
in order to get things done in this country.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about the 1948 election. You had Harry Truman. Folks said, this guy, well, first of all, when Roosevelt died, there are a lot of people that felt like they lost a family member. It was April 12th, 1945, right? Truman comes into office, and, historians said that folks were saying, what was the nation? Who was this country bumpkin from Missouri? The 48 election comes, and Truman is able to run against what he calls the do-nothing Congress. And so going back to that question about whether the 117th Congress is the high water mark, a lot of folks are not anticipating the 118th Congress to do anything at all, right? Because you have the House Republicans with a very, very slim majority, thanks to those New York congressional districts that went red, right? And they're able to kind of serve as a check on the Biden administration. Not to say that it was easy to pass legislation even when they had the trifecta. But I'm thinking that the 2024 campaign is going to probably be somewhat like the 1948 campaign. You're going to have Biden being able to campaign against McCarthy. Look at how long it took them to choose a speaker. The embarrassment of 15 rounds of voting. You even had a fight almost break out between Matt Gaetz and another Congress. I mean, there was chaos,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
All he has to do is say, look, this is the alternative, right? You don't like me? Okay. This is the alternative. Jim Clyburn, one of his famous quotes was, don't compare Biden to the almighty, compare him to the alternative. And I think Biden has adopted that motto, right? Compare me to the alternative. What are they proposing? What is their plan? What are they putting forward, right? Are they putting forward the same old tax cuts, right, for the top incoming, the top earning Americans? Whereas Biden is saying not a penny off your taxes is going to go if you make less than $400,000 a year. I think that a lot of folks, the same way they were surprised that Truman won in 24, are going to be, in 48, are going to be surprised that Biden won in 24. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I was definitely surprised to hear that candidates like Nikki Haley were proposing to cut Social Security, just because, I think it just makes it easier for us to, crusade our own party. So, I agree.
Yeah, I agree with your point. I think marketing towards Biden as the alternative, I believe that we would do a better job if they won't be able to use rhetoric behind tax breaks as a solution to inflation. I think that our biggest opposition is really just convincing voters that we're taking care of Medicare, we're taking care of all these issues, but also we're taking care of inflation too, because I think that will be their only actual ground floor legitimate argument.
I think seeing Biden as an alternative has worked for him very well so far. I know personally for me, in the 2016 election, a lot of people were like, at least he's better than Trump. And in the previous election in 2020, when we saw Trump become president, I know my dad was telling my mom, no, because my mom's of moderation. I don't know if I should say that, but she voted for the Green Party and everything. And my dad was telling her, no, you need to vote for Hillary. You need to vote for the Democratic Party so we can prevent Trump from getting in. So I think, and then she voted for Biden. I don't know if I should. Anyways, I'm sorry, but it was like I think like a lot of this is like, Biden is as a better alternative than what we saw Trump do, his rhetoric, everything that he stands for. So I think it's worked pretty well for him. If he continues to use it in the next election, I think it'll go pretty well.
Yeah, I really think the only thing that Trump can really use right now is, the fact that Roe v. Wade was overturned. And so for sure, we kind of have the upper hand, I feel like, on issues that real people care about.
Yeah.
So we are going to wrap up. I do want to apologize, Chris if you see me texting a little bit over here, it was Chris Matthews I was corresponding with. He does send his apologies. He was having some technical problems. He's in Washington, D.C. right now, and he's on a tight budget, tight schedule and everything. But he does express his willingness to come back or to make another appearance at Oakwood University. And so we're thankful for Congressman Clyburn's appearance, for Dr. Richard Haas's appearance, and for each of you very knowledgeable panelists. I always say, the political science department always gets slept on, right? The political science department is where the game changers are made. You've got future ambassadors to the United Nations right here, senators, congressmen, presidents, Supreme Court justices, and even some, effective civil rights lawyers. And so I'm grateful to each of you for making it out. There's so many things going on. It's alumni weekend, but we don't take it lightly that you chose to come here. So thank you all so much. We want to just go ahead and conclude episode 102 of the Political Mic. Any closing thoughts, panelists?
I just want to say thank you to you, Michael Taylor, and Dr. Foster, Professor Greer, Dr. Marcia Burden. I think they've really done a great job. Oh, and also Dr. Samuel London, can't forget him, of just really helping this department grow and also educating us. They're all very knowledgeable, exceptional professionals, teachers, and human beings. And I just want to thank you guys for the opportunity for me to be this knowledgeable about this subject.
Also want to express gratitude to the media team. We had a little, some hiccups this morning, but we're thankful for them and the talents that they brought to the table. Mr. Norman Jones, Mr. Blythe, fantastic folks working for us in the media team. Pax?
Yeah, same to what Elise said. Just thank you for this opportunity. It's been great.
Yeah, it's great to have
Did
conversations.
everything.
Yeah.
So that being said, thank you so much for coming. That concludes episode 102 of the Political Mic podcast. I do want to invite you to subscribe on YouTube if you haven't already. Subscribe, follow us on Twitter, follow Facebook, Instagram, and join the Telegram channel. We've got lively discussions going on. Download the Telegram app, and join the Political Mic Telegram channel if you want to stay up to date on the latest news and engage with other, political junkies. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Mike Taylor, the host of the Political Mic podcast. If you like what you heard tonight, I want to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I also want to ask you to please follow along on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and Amazon Music. You can also follow along and keep up with the conversation through our Telegram channel. Follow us on Twitter at @ThePolyMic, and follow us on Instagram. Thank you so much, and no matter what part of the political spectrum that you fall on, I want to encourage you to stay engaged, stay a part of the conversation, and stay informed. Thank you.